So what we're going to do today is start with Michigan State University Infrastructure Planning and Facilities. And Sabrina is the Chief of Staff with Dan Bowman. I get the pleasure of traveling to Lansing, Michigan in January when it's the most pleasant weather that you've ever had in the, no kidding, yeah, it is. Actually, Michigan State, I have had the pleasure of working with them for the last several years. Really enjoy the team, have really become, I always tell people when we work with our teams, we become good colleagues and friends. They're great friends of mine, and their story is really powerful because they've been at this for a long-term time. And Dan could not be with us today, but Sabrina and Dan and I work hand in hand on really building that systems improvement process. And Sabrina's going to tell us the story about Michigan State, looking at what those key drivers are for changing a culture. So Sabrina, it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to this group.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, welcome. As Jana said, my name is Sabrina Hebeler. I am the Chief of Staff for Michigan State University Infrastructure Planning and Facilities. In my role, I have the opportunity to oversee strategic planning and activity, organizational communication and change, and I maintain a role of liaison between the Vice President, Dan Bowman, and the rest of the organization. I'm incredibly honored to be here to be one of the first presentations at this conference, and I'm excited to give you a little bit of a peek into our journey over the last few years. I will be talking to you about the key drivers for changing a culture, but before we do that, I want to say two things. One, I hope you find that the next day and a half to be as inspiring as I have found it over the last few years. You're going to meet amazing people and hear amazing things, so I hope you take a lot away from it. And number two, if you're new here, if this is your first time with Studer Education, welcome to the family. We're going to share our story today, but I hope to hear a little bit about yours, either on a break or at the networking event tonight. So, who are we? MSU Infrastructure Planning and Facilities is responsible for planning, building, maintaining, beautifying, and energizing the physical environment at Michigan State. When a student, faculty, staff, or community member comes onto our campus, they are directly impacted by the work that we do. We employ approximately 1,300 employees made up of full-time, part-time, on-call, and student staff members. And we have been a partner with Studer Education for about 3.5 years. So during that time, we've tackled just a few challenges. The first of which was really understanding employee engagement. What does that mean for us? Developing a survey and rolling out results to drive action. We also have focused a lot of our time on further developing our strategy to encompass an organizational scorecard system. We've focused a lot of time on our executive leadership team, investing time into building that team and helping them engage in best practices such as leader rounding. We've also now formalized our journey on the Baldrige Excellence Award. So for those of you familiar with the criteria, we had used it. We are actually submitting our first application at the state level this year, so Studer's helping us out with that, so wish us luck. It's a really fun process, really fun. Joanne and I spent some quality time together this last week. And most recently, and not the least important, is really formalizing our leadership development practices. So we have begun that work, and we are now moving into a state of formalizing that. So as we look at our journey, I think it's important to talk about who we are as an organization. We exist on campus because we believe in service excellence, stewardship, and innovation. We live that out each day by being committed to being high-performing and leading edge in all that we do. And we just happen to be in the business of delivering services and facilities that help Spartans change the world. I did that for all Simon Sinek fans in the room, talking through that. But really, we focus that passion and energy to drive action every day through our strategic objectives of people, partner, and stewardship. So really by helping our people be the best that they can be every day, helping our partners achieve success and be the best that they can be every day, and by utilizing our resources of people, time, and money to the best of our ability each and every day. However, 4 years ago, just a short time really, feels like a decade, about 4 years ago, you couldn't get a group of people in the room at IPF to have a shared conversation and understanding about who we were, what our purpose was, and where we were headed. 2 to 3 years ago, less than 25% of the organization could probably have that same conversation and go through that exercise. Now, I'm not saying today that we're perfect. I'm not saying that we're at 100% understanding all the time. So full disclosure, that's not what this is about. But this is about progress and making change, because that's why we're all here. When the topic of organizational change comes up, there's often an audible sigh on the other end of that conversation. Whether you're a senior leader driving that change or you're an employee being impacted, it's really not easy, right? And in fact, we know that about 70% of organizational change initiatives fail. And they take a lot longer than we want them to, and then some. We know that people are absolutely necessary to this change, but that in order to change the organization, we also have to change them and their behaviors. We know that they're naturally resistant to change, and the more we increase that change, or if we let it stall out and hop back on the train, they're going to become even more resistant. But as I said, they're necessary, right? And in fact, if we involve them, they become less negative about the impacts of that change to them. So if it's so hard and it's so complex, then why do we do it? Well, for us, a few of the reasons were that our environment around us dictated that we do it. We had sweeping financial, leadership, political changes in our environment that dictated we couldn't show up as we'd been showing up for the last 10 years. The data told us we had to. Our administration started asking us to be more efficient, be more effective, and better demonstrate our value to campus. Internally, we had a desire to be a best place to work environment. We cared about how people came to work, how they felt about their work, and we wanted them to be proud of all that they were doing. So today, as I talk about our journey, I want to talk about it through the lens of the Lewin organizational change model. I find this to be a really simple way to talk about a really complex thing, right? So the Lewin model has been around for a long time, but it really breaks change down into 3 major components: the unfreezing, the change, and the refreezing. So the unfreezing is really preparing the organization, right, to want and to recognize that there is a need to change. So you're melting away the old, so to speak. The change is just that, moving from the old state to the new desired state, so that transition or that process from old to new. And the refreezing is getting to a point in which the new systems, structures, processes, behaviors have become normalized or organizational habit. We are now refreezing into that new state of mind. However, you can talk about this on a very tactical process level, or you can think about this in an organizational culture shift. But it's not just a straight line path of beginning and end, right? This is iterative. We are consistently going through this because our environment around us continuously changes, and so we have to as well. So when we look back on Michigan State's journey so far, because it's never ending, a continuous improvement journey, if we look at the unfreezing component, I can break it down into 5 things for us that really started to make that shift. In 2015, we had a change in leadership at the very top. We had an employee who had been with the organization for 40 years who believed in a hierarchical model in which decisions went all the way to the top to be made and went all the way back down to be implemented. So we shifted with his retirement to a new leader with a more modernized vision for a matrix organization in which we have a set of executive leaders and business leaders who are encouraged to collaborate across the organization to make the best decision possible. We also recognized that we needed to better understand where we were and where we were wanting to go. So we, at that time, bravely adopted the Baldrige Performance Excellence Criteria as a way to better understand where we were and what our strengths and opportunities were. That really started to lay the foundation for being more evidence-based in our decision-making. We then, as I said, had recognized that there was a need to better understand employee engagement. So at that time, we partnered with Studer Education and developed a survey and followed the results rollout process to engage in more conversations about what that meant. And this really was the first formal safe space for employees to be heard, to be listened to. The first formal safe space. We had laid out a mission, vision, and values, but people really wanted to understand more what that meant. Right? If we're achieving success, what is that like? So we created the 3 strategic objectives that I shared with you: people, partner, stewardship. And that became really a focal point for all that we did. Employees started to ask, well, if it doesn't align with those objectives, why are we doing it? We further built out that strategy by beginning to think about a cadence of activity that supported it. So how are we driving that strategy home? And that was really grounded in annual data collection processes, thinking about how we're analyzing that and driving action, and then how are we measuring progress going forward. I want to make a note. All of this stuff happened in a matter of like 18 months to 2 years. And so I'm looking around the room, some of you have different reactions. That's exactly what our organization felt. Some of them were like, oh my God, please stop. Right, like I can't do anymore. And other people, including my boss, was like, why isn't this happening faster? The point is, there was reaction, and that's a sign of progress. When there is a feeling or a reaction to something, you are beginning to make change. Emotions are data. I'm looking at Barb because she knows. As we continued the unfreezing, we did start to see some real changes occur. So we utilized our employee survey data paired with the information from the Baldrige Performance Excellence Criteria and began to really tackle our opportunities for improvement by developing strategic organizational-wide action plans. These are things like rolling out mobile devices to all of our employees or developing a leadership assessment tool, thinking about our diversity data differently. We became more, and continue to become more mature, in our data collection activities. We started asking questions about, is this the right data? Or what are we actually trying to achieve with this? And became more comprehensive, including more objective touch points that could give us the most information to make the best decision possible. We doubled down and continue to double down in our investment in employee engagement in the rollout process, helping people to understand what engagement actually is and what it means for them and their staff, but also to help them facilitate conversations about the data rather than just look at the number. And I have a colleague here who's going to tell you pretty much the whole details of that process, so I look forward to hearing him speak on that. As I said, we put some time into our executive leadership team. Our survey so lovely pointed out to us that we really needed to work on our executive leadership team. They were the focal point of our survey feedback for a couple of years. And so we had started to begin building really comprehensive sets of tools and structures and systems for them to operate in to be the best that they could be. However, during this time, about 70% of our team transitioned away. Is it still there? Okay, it went away for a hot minute. Okay. About 70% of the team transitioned away, either due to retirement or other opportunities, but we took that and leveraged that as a way to get the right people on the bus. And this, for me, from my perspective, is really where the rubber started to meet the road for us. We really started to see those things that we were trying to change actually make movement. Finally, but probably one of the most important things we've done is really looking at those strategic objectives and putting a number to them. If we were being the best people, best partners, and best stewards, how would we measure that? So really developing that organizational scorecard system and set of measures to finalize that shift to evidence-based decision-making and driving strategic action that way. So we continue to change, and our refreeze has begun. So the things that we have laid out as the new desired state for us are starting to take shape and really be grounded with our staff. One of the biggest signals of this to us is really around our strategic cadence. We have more shared understanding of why we exist, how people are supposed to engage in those activities, and they're showing up to the conversation more frequently than they ever have before. We continue to build and maintain our commitment to employee engagement and making sure that it's a conversation and that we're providing listening space for them rather than just focusing on the numbers. We continue to build and maintain our commitment to the organizational scorecard system. So this has become the focal point of our strategy cycle. This is the start and the end and the middle of everything that we do. And most importantly, for us, I think we've begun to align our employee development opportunities with those strategies. So if we are asking people to show up to do a thing differently and asking them to perform differently, we've begun giving them the development opportunities that align with that. The last two things on this list are really quite new, so whether they're refrozen yet is kind of out there. Jury's still out, but we're working on it. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we have a set of executive leaders and a set of business leaders. For some time, there's been a little bit of tension or conflict about who is responsible for what decision and when they're supposed to make it. And so we have begun to have a serious conversation about outlining and formalizing the ways in which they will operate to make the best decision possible for the business and also providing leadership development opportunities in that decision-making process. And the theme of this year has been accountability and expectations. So I know many of us tackle that conversation, but we are having really, really intense times of discussion about what is accountability and what does rolling out a standard set of expectations for leaders across the organization look like. And not just in relation to their job duties, but how are they showing up as people? So, and I probably could have just given you this one slide and been done with it. I could have saved you some time today. But if we look back on that journey and really boiled it down to what were the key drivers for cultural and organizational change for us, what have they been, and what would I say is my recommendation? Number one, know where you want to go. Develop your strategy. And not just your mission and vision and values, but the strategic cadence of activities to support that strategy into the future. Number two, determine how you're going to get there. Use your data to make decisions, and even better yet, build systems around that data so that people can really understand the why behind why you're using that to make the decision you're going to make. Number three, and this is critical, measure your progress. So set goals, measure them, and share it widely. When you share it, people begin to connect their individual work with the larger purpose of your organization. And number four, most critical, get the right people on the bus. Your systems are only as good as the leaders who are driving them. So with any journey, I think it's really important to share the lessons that we've learned along the way. We've learned some hard ones. I think we all do on this journey. So what I know as a leader in this process of change, and what we know as an organization, is that you will absolutely have to redefine success for your organizations, for your teams, and for your individual employees. Some employees are going to have to completely rethink their job, and a lot of employees are going to have to rethink how they're showing up every day. Number two, and we struggled with this heavily in the first 2 years, meet people where they are. We struggled with this because we kept asking people to meet us where we wanted to go, and we kept pushing without turning around to ask and check for understanding. They simply just wanted a why. And had we met people where they were, we would have made it a lot farther, quicker, and in step than we had in those first 2 years. And the last one's my favorite. We just aren't that special. So I don't know how many meetings I've sat in over the last 4 years, and people are like, well, you know, we're higher education, or we're this industry, or we're that industry. And the excuse is always, it just won't apply to us because there's just too many things that make us different. We're not that special, guys. I mean, everyone in this room, you're not that special in which some of these tools and tactics are not and will not apply to you. They absolutely can and they absolutely will. And in fact, I really encourage you to think about your uniqueness as a competitive advantage or an asset rather than a crutch. So as I wrap up the lessons learned today, I wanted to share from a much more personal note just one more thing. It's really easy for me to stand up here and talk about our journey, one with many great successes, but also many great failures. It's easy for me to say that I could lay out a path from you from point A to point B and tell you how to get there with all of the right tools and tactics at the right time. But the truth is, it takes all of our employees and us as leaders to really make that change and that journey a successful reality. And behind me, I wanted to share this graph. This graph really demonstrates the anatomy of learning. The most critical key driver of culture change from my perspective is to make space for learning. For your individual employees, for your teams and your departments, and your overall organization as a whole. Over the next 2 days, you are going to hear some of the most amazing results, some really great practices that you're going to wonder why you haven't thought of it yet. And you're going to meet really great people. You're going to be super fired up to go back. And then it's back to reality, back to your story, where you likely play a lead role in how that journey plays out. It's not easy. If you remember, I said 70% of change initiatives fail. It's going to get hard. You're going to have conversations about trust and accountability and how individual employees are showing up and how do we manage that. You're absolutely 95% sure, I'm 95% sure you're absolutely going to want to bail at some point. 100%, on the change or even on the organization. But I encourage you not to. I push you to keep going, right? To lean into the practices, to lean into reflection on yourself, to lean into the people and resources that you're going to meet here, right? Because if you keep pushing, you see that? If you keep pushing, we're absolutely capable of achieving the results that we want to achieve and then some. Culture change is a huge transition and one that never ends. It requires a lot of hard work. It requires a lot of reflection of self, because it's not just a journey for the organization, it's a journey as a leader. There's going to be failure. And in order to do this, we have to open ourselves up to the unknown with a little bit of courage and a willingness to learn and to help others do the same. So, I thank you for spending a little space and time with me this morning. Is it still morning? Might be afternoon. Either way, I thank you for that. I look forward to continue learning with you today, tomorrow, and every day after. Thank you.